Hi, my name's Will Vinton. I'm the producer and director of The Adventures of Mark Twain. This is a really pretty amazing, pretty special film to those of us that worked on it, in that it was a true labor of love done by a very small team of animators and artists over a period of about 4 years, between the years of 1981 and 85, I believe. The film was released in 1985. One of the interesting things about The Adventures of Mark Twain's story was that Mark Twain was actually born in 1835, when Halley's Comet was closest to the Earth. And he had sort of predicted his own death as the time when Halley's Comet came to visit again. And so we kind of picked up on that idea. And in fact, Twain actually passed away when the comet was closest to the Earth once again in 1910. But our story was sort of built from that that factual aspect, and we built this fantastic story that evolved from his sort of rendezvous, if you will, with Halley's Comet. This particular production, one of the aspects of it that's, I think, completely unique is that it is the first claymation feature film, and it is likely to be the last all 100% claymation feature film. Really a pretty amazing piece of work. We were very much purists about the idea that we wanted to have everything in the image be clay. Those paintings, the books, the water, the skies, everything is made of plasticine clay, which is a pretty amazing thing. My theory was that if you were in some kinds of films, stop motion films in particular, where you see different materials all over the place in different places, cardboard here and water and glass and plastic and so on, it sort of ripped you out of the story. So the theory that I was working on and our team was working on was that if everything is clay, then after a while you'll get past the extraordinary aspect that it's amazingly everything there has been made of this material. And even in the atmospheric things that we'll see later on, the skies and things like that are actually made of plasticine clay done in a painted sort of fashion. Anyway, that's it's a very time-consuming, extraordinarily painstaking process to do. Each one of these, the characters of Huck and Tom here, every frame of their expressions and their lip sync have to be sculpted one frame at a time. So it requires a great deal of skill on the part of every animator to be able to sculpt in a similar style. As you can see, there's everything here visible is made of clay, as I said, and our hope is that it sort of you sort of forget all about what the material is pretty soon. We'll see how that works. The airship, which Mark Twain and the kids travel in, was sort of conceived as a kind of the embodiment of the complete works of Twain. Part Jules Verne aircraft, part Mississippi riverboat, part of course blimp and starship, I guess. It is a pretty fun thing to create, but the idea was inside of it, embodied within it, is basically the complete works of Mark Twain. The voices on Mark Twain were the Huck Finn, Becky Thatcher, Tom Sawyer were all semi-pro actors, and of course the voice of Mark Twain himself was done by James Whitmore, who is really spectacular. Becky Thatcher was Michelle Mariana, who was also a pro. They really turned out pretty well. I was really pleased with that particular casting.
I care to see, except for heaven and hell, and I have only a vague curiosity.
Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn are sort of the classic, probably best known characters in Mark Twain's sort of more folk writer status, known for their adventures, and so they become our heroes, with Becky Thatcher, sort of wanting to get in on the action. The thing I really loved about Mark Twain's lines is that each and every one of them was drawn from the script, drawn from Mark Twain's own works, in some fashion or other, from his autobiographical materials or his books or his essays. So every even quote, is comes from Twain. The indexivator was the contraption that we came up with to travel around the ship, kind of a elevator, kind of a fantastic elevator type thing that they slip in and out of. Kind of fun actually seeing them emerge from it and into it. When they emerge, go into it, they actually are being sliced off and evolve into the wall of that block of clay, and then of course sometimes you see it from the inside, and it's totally different. The airship, again, it was kind of part Jules Verne contraption. But in trying to sort of evoke a lot of the elements of the Mississippi riverboat scene, which Mark Twain is famous for having been a riverboat pilot for a period of his life as well.
You out, didn't I, Tom Sawyer? You are stowaways.
Becky, you're no balloon inspector.
Neither are you. Ooh, are you ever gonna catch it when your Aunt Polly gets a hold of it?
Boys, Tom, Huck.
You'll see along the way the characters, the sort of two Twains, the sort of light, white-suited light Twain and the otherwise dark Twain every now and then. Of course, and I think this, upon first viewing it, hopefully it's more mysterious as to whether or not who that other character is, the dark Twain. But when Mark Twain was a very complex character, and we felt strongly that in order to tell a story about Twain, about Mark Twain, it was somehow about him, it had to be fairly complex, and it had to have not only the light folk hero side, but also a very dark side as well. Twain was, as I said, complex, but also cynical and brilliantly cynical and dark at the same time. And those two sides of him, fought throughout this story, throughout his life, really. And as Twain said himself, everyone is a moon who has a dark side that he never shows to anybody. This was sort of a major part of the conflict, I guess, we wanted to put into this story.
This trade wind to where the comet's parabola comes close to the Earth, or close enough.
We decided to make up some of the parts of this adventure as with some of Twain's own separate stories, including things like the Calaveras, the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County, Captain Stormfield, the Diary of Adam and Eve, and so forth. And the first one, this is actually one of the first stories that Twain supposedly wrote for commercially, the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County. We liked using, I think, a lot of metamorphosis in Twain. It's one of the things, metamorphosis images is one of the things that clay does very well. Transforming, in this case, the frog, reducing him down and transforming him onto the map. Even the way in which some of the frogs move, though, is actually kind of quite almost a metamorphosis. We had fun creating what we called mustache sync with this character Smiley. His mustache really simulates very, very flapping, almost like a seagull, I guess, but it simulates sort of what the upper lip does alone, without a lower lip or a jaw, when one was doing lip sync. And then the stranger, who had the brown mustache, he also had the enormous mustache. So it's a variation on the same kind of thing. But it was pretty fun creating, as I say, mustache sync for the two characters. For people who are real fans of animation and like to see things, these are actually fun images to stop and go one frame at a time through. Some of the things like the jumping frog, for example, or just to sort of see how some of these things are created. The illusion of fast motion is created. The frog actually transforms into a kind of almost like a comet at various moments in his jumps.
Maybe you just don't understand frogs. Anyway,
when he flies up into the air, he's actually suspended sometimes by monofilament from off camera, from above. Monofilament like fishing line, very, very, very tiny, which can't be seen or shouldn't be seen from the camera's point of view.
That's all right. I'll go get you a frog.
The voice of Smiley was done by a well-known actor, Dallas McKennon. Great kind of country, Western country actor from his day. The two of them together were a really fun pair to record. Real characters, right out of kind of the Old West themselves. You notice in this pond sequence, the clay is all water. We're not trying to create realistic water exactly. We're actually using the clay and the animation to sort of imply and give a kind of a spirit to water. And I think stylistically, that's sort of the way we were approaching most of the effects throughout this film. Trying to not, I think, be realistic in the look, but rather to create an impression of water, or an impression of sky, or an impression of whatever rock or whatever it might be. The music was all performed by Billy Scream, written by Susan Shadburn, who also wrote the screenplay. Billy wrote an awful lot of the music as well, additional music, and scored it. Did it very, very inexpensively. So it's actually quite remarkable and well done, all things considered, considering the amount of sort of effort and money available to make this happen. Billy Scream was produced work out of Portland, Oregon, where this entire film was produced. I started the company actually in Portland, and we shot the entire project in Portland over the period, as they say, of about 4 years.
I do wonder why in tarnation that there frog just give up. Wonder if there ain't something the matter with him.
Plasticine clay is can be melted. It's a oil and wax-based clay, and it can be melted, and you can stir it, change colors, and create colors just by adding universal colorant or mixing two different colors of clay together. And so you can get some pretty nice subtle tones, all made of solid plasticine.
set myself when I heard it. It was a big success.
Took a lot of these characters
I became a writer.
to make an hour and a half movie, meaning that each of these characters had to be kind of cleaned up or actually completely rebuilt for their shots. When plasticine characters are manipulated and animated, they fatigue and the colors begin to get messy and that sort of thing. So we actually ended up using, having to use a new character or a fresh character, refurbished character, almost every scene or pretty much every scene. And so there were a phenomenal number of characters of Mark Twain's created for this project, of Becky Thatcher's Huck Finn's and Tom Sawyer's in particular. The incidental characters, sometimes you got away with one. The comet through the telescope is actually a clay painting. The clouds that encircle the airship and so forth, are actually clay painting done against also a kind of a clay painted sort of star field. So the clay painting was done by Joan Gratz, and you'll see a lot of it throughout the film, both in the form of clouds. Again, in this morning after, also just layers. These are layers of different clouds that have been stagger printed, and with clay painting. If you want to create an atmospheric effect, even in front of the camera, then we'd layer the clay paintings just a transparency of the clay painting, so you'd see a little bit of it in the front of the characters as well as back. Those of you who are interested in the technical aspects, this film was the composites of the clay paintings and the backgrounds was almost all done in what was called front screen projection, where the paintings were previously shot and then projected onto a screen behind the animation, behind the models that you see in the foreground. And those are picked up, seen from the camera's point of view, as if they're in the background. Front screen projection is actually a really wonderful technique, but it all requires everything to be produced in the camera. All the special effects are done in the camera, so there's no second chance. If you blow the composite, you basically blow the piece of animation as well, and you have to reshoot it. So here we're inside the indexivator. And the indexivator again was sort of the idea was it's you could go anywhere within the complete works of Mark Twain in this place. love to actually get in one of those things and explore. It'd be pretty wild. But it made for a really fun and pretty fanciful kind of journey, and way to incorporate enormous numbers of amount of stuff that was part of Twain's life. His library billiard room, which is also the music room and so on, was a really pretty beautiful piece of sculpting. It had paintings on the wall that were all made of clay. It had lots and lots of artifacts, all as true as we could get them anyway, to what Twain kind of had, and what he maintained. We took some liberties here and there, like the monument to Adam and Eve. That was became a little bit of a story point that helped to introduce the diary of Adam and Eve.
That's my monument to Adam and Eve.
Thanks. They're naked.
So are we all the day we're born. But learn to be modest. Not all over, just in places.
It's as I sit and watch it myself, it's hard for me to even keep talking because I find myself sort of caught up in the lines and things. Actually, I still really love sitting and listening, hearing some of these lines from Mark Twain through James Whitmore.
Found the
Really great stuff.
In the beginning.
Great writer.
Perhaps
Great,
you would be
fantastic
interested
writer.
in my research.
Yes, sir, I surely would.
And so would I.
Have a look here.
The Diary of Adam and Eve.
The Diary of Adam and Eve starts with a kind of a creation scene that I really enjoyed a lot, coming up with a very fanciful version of the creation. We'd done some other kinds of things like that, called including one film called The Creation, that was all done in clay painting prior to this. And so this was a chance to do something much more very fanciful and playful with the Garden of Eden. Don Merck was the set designer, decorator. Came up with some wonderful plants for the garden. Some of these sequences at the opening of the Adventures, or of the Diary of Adam and Eve portion of Twain, I actually shot myself. It's some of the last things I probably shot, including Adam's emergence from the ground. The scene here with Adam coming up out of the mud and sleeping, that was actually shot backwards. So it was actually fairly easy compared to what it looks like. It was actually shot, with him pristinely sitting there and then gradually melding into the clay. And of course, it looks like it comes the other way, and it looks more fantastic because of that. Adam was, as a character, was actually designed off of Mark Twain himself. In fact, we sort of took the position that Adam and his story with Eve was somewhat autobiographical, with as many pieces of work are when from an author. But it's subtle. But the actual face of Adam is molded out of a very similar mold as the character of Mark Twain himself, with very different hair and mustache and so forth. Obviously, we have to use clay water because it's a stop-motion film. We can't use actual water because water won't stay still between successive exposures of film. But you could. There are a variety of ways of creating water in stop motion. We just happen to like, I think, the sort of fanciful look to the water that was created by just simply, kind of smearing and streaking it and pixelating the foamy parts. I really like the character of Adam a lot. The voice of Adam was played by John Morrison, who is a very good actor who I've used before in a number of other productions as well, including The Great Cognito. The Great Cognito is a character that does various voices and transforms into who he's kind of impersonating. But I really liked how John provided this kind of long-suffering attitude just about his relationship with Eve, especially at the beginning when he's really dubious about her presence in the garden. Eve was recorded by almost a non-actor. It was tricky trying to find the voice for her, but we ended up with Carol Edelman, who did a really interesting voice, I thought, more than anything, which had certain challenges because she wasn't quite as much of a pro in some respects, but the voice was amazing, and I thought had this nice gravelly quality about it that, and a kind of a curiosity about it that I thought worked well for Eve. The story that we created of the Diary of Adam and Eve was very similar and uses all the same, I think, words in many cases as the books that he wrote, which were called The Diary of Adam and The Diary of Eve. In his story, the two stories were separate, but when you read them successively, you understand that they're talking about the same thing. So we've juxtaposed those stories so that they could, were constantly being intertwined, their various diaries. For sure, Twain's version was not as, I guess, comedic as we portrayed it visually, but it's very fun. It's very funny, and it is a kind of a battle of the sexes that Twain created between the two. That it was undeniable. I mean, he says one thing, she says the other about the same thing, and you sort of understand the difference, between the two characters in a pretty funny way. We've definitely hammed it up from the visual point of view, but all of the specific subjects and lines and so forth are verbatim from Twain. I guess someone could question our sanity for using the Diary of Adam and Eve and trying to make it into something that would be okay for children. But I think our feeling was we could ham it up sufficiently to make it good for all ages. We created a special armature for these characters, giving them that was part of a kind of giving an idea to create a stylized sort of way in which they move. So they actually had a kind of a shuffle, where they shuffle their feet and swivel their hips. And the armature was built fairly simply as a pivoting device where the legs and the torso could pivot from the other parts of the body. And actually, it worked fine, I think. It gave it a stylized, the whole Adam and Eve sequence, a kind of its own sort of stylized look as to how they move around and so forth, which was intended to be sort of comedic.
My life is not as happy as it was. Sunday.
The sets in Diary of Adam and Eve were designed mostly by Don Merck and actually fabricated to some extent by Don and Joan Gratz. Really some fun, very imaginative kind of Dr. Seussian sort of structures. Characters were done by Barry Bruce. Matt Worker worked on some. Matt's a political cartoonist who joined us early on and did some work on the project as well.
Where did he get that word? I don't think I've ever used it.
This was supposed to represent Niagara Falls, if I remember correctly.
All of the Diary of Adam and Eve was reference filmed. We photographed all of the actors doing these lines, going through all of the different lines, and then edited the footage as well as of the visual footage as well as the soundtrack to make an animatic, a complete animatic of the whole sequence. And we even did some things where we would shoot characters kind of racing around like Eve was at the edge of the waterfall, screaming and yelling and pointing, sort of reference filming some of her gestures and so on. And it was just another aid for the animators to do something kind of cool.
I escaped last night.
The characters have huge feet, and that's again part of the stylized thing that we did, that little shuffle walk and scoot walk that they do. Sometimes they actually are scooting like long on their feet. But in general, the caricature that we've chosen, large heads, large hands, large feet, tend to be fairly expressive kinds of. Those are the most expressive features, frankly, on a human body. Hands, the face in particular, so the hands are so big, and then the feet probably need to be large as well. The feet also in stop motion have the advantage. The large feet have the advantage of being more stable as well. for stop-motion puppets.
As the day of rest.
When Eve looks into the water, that's another nice example of clay painting done by Joan Gratz. Beautifully done.
I need someone to talk
Very stylized sort of version of water.
It is a good friend to me. And my only one. It talks when I talk. It is sad.
I guess you could say some of the sets in the Diary of Adam and Eve are kind of look like they're sort of inspired in some ways by sort of Dr. Seuss-like images. But I think they really come from a wide range of sort of our backgrounds. Don Merck and Joan Gratz and Barry Bruce and myself all worked on set elements. There are a lot of characters, animal characters in the Diary of Adam and Eve. Each one of them was, the ones that weren't being used many times over, actually were sometimes designed and even sculpted on an armature. And the armature then sufficed as the final animation armature. So we would take these characters and actually take them in and animate them on the sets, rather than going through the process of going through a separate design process and an animation model and so on. Of course, sometimes that having one character bit us because we ended up having to do more than just a few scenes in it, and the character had to be constantly refurbished as best we could to get it back into its pristine shape in order to animate. And that was always a problem. For the most part, each of these characters started off each scene with if not a brand new character, then a totally refurbished character. So we had in the end, dozens and dozens of Adams and Eves that we had to have modeled cleanly in order to go into each of these various shots. Remember that the lines are all from Mark Twain. Obviously, Twain didn't write scripts, so he didn't create the visuals to these stories. So we've taken liberty to expand and make more comedic some of the lines that are there, but the lines themselves are all his.
Have you ever looked at their teeth, Adam? They aren't herbivores.
I foresee trouble. We'll immigrate.
He escaped.
The fall of the garden, the sort of dark, looming tension and storm and so forth that with Adam trying to escape and the animals all helping Eve to get the apple from the tree and so on, was really created as a kind of an extra level of conflict that would naturally flow into the storm sequence and to rip us out of the diary story and back into our main story of the kids and Twain in Adventures of Mark Twain. So we partially used the fall as a device to sort of pull us back before we obviously returned to the Diary of Adam and Eve much later in our story. Hopefully, mood-wise, anyway, it was effective, even if it's kind of a hard transition in some respects in terms of story. The storm sequence, which is this particular area, has good examples of use of the front screen projection clay painting techniques, both in the background and also as using clay painting materials in the foreground as just sort of atmospheric wisps of wind going by as well.
Like hell we are!
The colors and all are really intended to be very dark and of course it's a storm anyway, and this is sort of the dark Twain's having his heyday here, creating chaos or something.
It's a great shot with the airship at night. We use grain of wheat lights, actually practical light bulbs flashing on and off on the ship, on the big ship, whenever we needed to see it at night. They created a really nice effect and actually created a kind of a glow with the use of our background projection material.
The airship was really a pretty amazing thing. There were a lot of different scales of it. Some were very small. Some, like the big lighted one that you see here, was actually huge. It weighed a ton, literally made of clay and metal and wood and foam, but clay over all the outside of it. Pretty big contraption that had to be floated around on a camera crane to move. The thing that I really like the most is about some of this is that there is some really nice character animation in stop motion and for claymation, done very, very quickly and inexpensively, as animation goes these days. The primary animators were Barry Bruce. Joan Gratz did clay paintings, some animation. Matt Worker, Craig Bartlett, Tom Gasick, myself, Bill Feasterman. One of the things that we did was to put individual artists on some of the close-ups of each of the characters. Also, I should mention Mark Gustafson, who worked on Huck Finn and the Twain and the Frog, and was a very good animator, director. I'm probably missing somebody, and I'll have to add that. But one of the things we did was, I was mentioning, was to put kind of cast each animator for a particular character, especially for the close-up or the signature shots. So Barry Bruce was responsible for the close-ups of Mark Twain. Tom Gasick did the Tom Sawyer character. Bill Feasterman focused on Becky Thatcher, and Mark Gustafson focused on Huck Finn. One of the things that does is to put one particular style or look, which is inevitable in the hands of a particular sculptor in their particular sculpting styles. But when you had group shots, you had to sort of rely on one animator. You couldn't have multiple animators in there animating the whole time. So we did forego that approach when you had multiple characters, but tried to make sure that anything that we called was a signature shot for a particular character, that their animator was responsible for that shot.
I don't think we're ever gonna get back home.
Oh, yes, we are. Tom's got a plan, don't you, Tom?
Huh? What?
What in the... Aunt Polly?
Some of the performances of the characters really, really pretty nice. Amazingly nice. There's a shot here, like this one of the Bill Feasterman shot of Becky Thatcher. Yeah, and there's some more of those later on that are really nice, very subtly produced.
That was close. She was gonna make me whitewash that old fence again.
Tom Sawyer, you chowderhead! Open that door!
If you want off so bad.
Now the observant viewer will notice the light Twain and the dark Twain just by their suits, very obviously, once they've been through it. But perhaps not right away.
else, you lummox.
Fame is a vapor. The only earthly certainty is oblivion.
The Mysterious Stranger was a pretty interesting character, and I really loved the character. I loved the design that Barry did of the characters. Mysterious Stranger comes from some of the more darker Letters to the Earth, some of the darker works that Twain created, and it's very heavy, so much existential sort of writing. And it's one of those things where the sequence of The Mysterious Stranger has been taken out of context and shown on YouTube and things like that, and looks like some sort of horrific kind of thing. Personally, I think it works really well as being, sort of showing some of the darker side of Twain and the more cynical side, along with the sort of folk hero, folk writer part of Twain that you see elsewhere.
Like other curious things. Are you hungry?
Sure am.
The Mysterious Stranger character, I guess the idea of having a mask on a stick like that, other than just a very, very cool design, a stick that he could hold, was that he was, in some ways, he was faceless, and he was all things. He was benevolent and kind, but he was also harsh, and he was both a devil and an angel, all sort of at the same time. And he could transform from one character, one attitude to the other quickly, randomly. He's an observer of sort of human nature, and the little people that the kids create and so on quickly become this little society of what it is that the Mysterious Stranger observes as human nature, things that actually he doesn't like about human beings, frankly. And this is definitely some of the really dark and cynical stuff that Twain was writing about. He thought at times, I think, and said at times, that the human race was really kind of a mess and needed a complete overhaul. And I think that was, the source of some of the Mysterious Stranger's actions. It was actually kind of fun to do these little people, these little clay people, because they were so crude and simple. And it was like the sort of old style of clay animation that we used to do, I think, before we got much more sophisticated. It was an opportunity to do, effectively more of a childish version, I guess, of little human beings. But that was so juxtaposed by this sort of darker elements of the Mysterious Stranger. And then at the end, the idea that there is of no consequence, so we can just get rid of these little people and make some more some other time. Definitely, adult material. And in general, I guess it's worth noting that this is a film that we never really saw per se as a children's movie, even though it was made at a time when when animation was considered stuff for children. We really felt that Mark Twain was really a very serious author, probably one of the best and most serious authors in the English language, and he really deserved a much more kind of a serious version than sort of to make a silly, I guess, little kids show out of this thing. So we very much were making an animated movie for ourselves first, and as adults, and for other adults as well. We never felt that there was anything there that would be terribly objectionable by any means for children, and in fact, I think they really will enjoy a lot of the project. But it's definitely a movie that was, as I say, made for really thinking adults in some ways. to enjoy and to be inspired by it at some level. Injun Joe, here's another example of a character that's actually a pretty dark character, especially the way Twain talked about it. And of course, we just get a glimpse of him. That's all we have time for here. But we sort of like paying homage to Injun Joe.
Remember your old friend, Injun Joe?
Mr. Twain, why did you do that?
I realize that from the cradle up,
That's the dark Twain talking.
like the rest of the race.
I've been never like the rest of the human race, never quite sane at night. And his book, The Damned Human Race.
That does it.
We're only waiting for the right moment now.
Right moment for what?
There's a some really great character animation in this little sequence where the kids react. I love Becky's reaction here. It's beautiful. It's very subtly done.
Well, do ya?
Yeah.
We're gonna hijack this balloon.
What?
Hijack.
Can't you see it? Tom Sawyer.
So Tom Sawyer now has a plan
From Madman's Death Wish.
and a way to become a hero. The scene with Twain at the organ was definitely, without question, I think I was inspired by the sort of the Nautilus Nemo image of from Jules Verne. Twain, who did not play the piano but liked player pianos, here has a player organ that depicts his mood, his rather dark, somber mood at this moment, and perhaps the pain that he's felt during his life. Fun sequence. I love musical stuff like this. That was the library billiard room, which one thing nice about a claymation set is you just relight it for and to create a totally different atmosphere, totally different mood. This scene with the kids in the boiler room in their bunks, which was sort of a makeshift, as if they'd sort of makeshift created bunks there, was almost done entirely with lighting and stuff, because there are very few props or anything in the scene that were built.
Tomorrow.
With the airship, we had about 3, maybe 4 different scaled versions. A tiny one that was lighted, that you could, like the one here going in front of the moon, but we also had other airships that worked for a small one for the distance shots, but then really close-up versions for animated for the characters, and in-between sized ones as well. Each one was covered with clay and had to look really good.
Mr. Twain? What's this?
Now you be careful there. That's the central power panel. Ah, London. Right on schedule. Good thing, too. That comet won't be around again till I'm 150. By that time, I may have changed my mind.
All right, Scouts. What'd you uncover?
Well, the steering looks pretty easy.
I found the power thrusters, but I don't know.
Well, I've found a way to stop this ship cold. What's that?
Mark Twain's notebook was supposed to just be, nothing but a, sort of an entire endless room of manuscripts of unfinished and finished manuscripts that Twain had written. It's kind of a fun environment, it's just like as if it would go on forever with just papers that Twain had written. Probably not quite that extensive, his writings, but needless to say, it's very time-consuming to build a lot of these things, these kinds of set pieces. But again, this is with a very, very small crew. We shot the entire Adventures of Mark Twain with a crew of about 15 altogether, and that included not only animators but camera support and sculptor, set decorators and so on. Actually, it's more than that by far if you include, of course, the cast and the post-production staff and so forth. But it's definitely a fairly time-consuming process. Interestingly, stop motion is actually fairly direct in the sense that you start a frame with a single animator can start a shot and animate all the way through the sequence in a day or half a day, even in some cases, per shot, per cut, and that's actually fairly efficient compared to having a huge crew of people working over and over on iterative processes like with computer animation. So it's it at least done this way is very cost effective, although very difficult, no question. And one of the most difficult things is finding enough animators capable of sculpting this well and being good animators at the same time. So we had to kind of train a lot of the people that came in, because there really wasn't any place where you can go to, say, claymation school to learn this stuff.
Huh? Oh, I don't know. I don't want to express an opinion. You see, I'd have friends in both places.
Like all animated films, we started off with a storyboard, a script, and then a storyboard, and then transformed this storyboard into set pieces and designs and that sort of thing, and let it evolve to becoming, the sort of scenes. We followed this script fairly closely, the animatic and the storyboards fairly closely, so there was a very, very small shooting ratio of meaning materials that would not be entered into the film.
His own comet, too. Stormfield's a man with faith. Means he's willing to believe in what he knows ain't so.
The sequence called Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven was a pretty fun sequence, mostly animated by, I believe, Craig Bartlett, and perhaps I think Bill Feasterman shot some of this as well. Stormfield had, in Mark Twain's story, had been racing a comet, and it got him way off his bearings. Is trying. He was on his way to the afterlife here, and got him way off course, and leads him to this sort of alien heaven, where he encounters these three-headed alien characters who are quite characters. The voice of the aliens is actually Tim Connor again. All three heads.
I'm from America, the United States of America.
Craig Bartlett, who animated this sequence, went on to create Hey Arnold and work as a director of animation on Dinosaur Train and a variety of other films, projects as well. Good animator, talented guy, good guy.
From the world.
When Craig first joined us from right out of Evergreen College, actually as an apprentice, so he came a long way fast to do this sequence.
Actually, Mark Gustafson, who was the main animator for Huck Finn, also joined us really as an apprentice. I think his first job at the studio was removing a possum from the driveway. So you started really at the bottom sometimes, I guess. But Mark went on to become a fabulous director, animator first, and then director. In fact, he's directed a number of things, including fantastic Mr. Fox, the animation in that film, and lots of other great things.
That divergence has caused all this trouble. Well, it's landed you at a gate that's billions of leagues from the right one. Oh, go on in. You'll be safe forever, and you won't have any more trouble. Next.
I'm off.
Creating things like clay clouds can be a little bit tricky. Clay is a very tactile, substantial material. Clouds are not. They're very wispy and obviously and fluffy. So, it's a little bit of a stretch in some cases. But I don't know. It probably looks more like snow than than clouds. I don't know. But no, I think it worked. Actually, works all right. Presumably, alien heaven is what aliens like and desire when they die and go to an afterlife. It's filled with all of the things that they want to be able to do for eternity. And so that was the premise on this, that one's probably has to be in his own heaven to be happy, as opposed to somebody else's heaven. Somebody else's heaven, according probably to Twain, in fact, could be the next person's hell. And that's basically what Captain Stormfield learns. Creating the three-headed alien voices was actually kind of fun. I just took different takes. I was actually editing that part of it. I took different takes of Tim Connor's voice and treated him like kind of Huey, Dewey, and Louie, going from one take to another take, so there would be slight differences from each of them, and sometimes putting them all together, on the same simultaneously, so it sounded like they were talking in unison, all three heads. However, once he's there, Captain Stormfield begins to wonder. He's got all the right accoutrements, the things that he's expecting of heaven, harp, hymn book, wings, so on. But he's not sure that he came to the right place after all, when he actually goes to this rather pious heaven of his own imagination.
Good God, what a swindle.
Actually, Mark Twain himself struggled, I think, with living in a very, very pious time with a very pious wife, actually, and struggled with his own sense of, I guess, of belief and the somewhat rigid Christian upbringing that he had. The Sphinx character comes from Innocents Abroad, one of Twain's stories, and we've taken a little bit of liberty here, to say the least, parking the airship by the Sphinx, only to have ultimately the airship rip off the Sphinx's nose. Hence, the Sphinx no longer has a nose, as we all know.
Come on. To ascend until exactly 6 o'clock.
So when the alarm goes off.
Tom Sawyer always had to have some sort of a scheme, some sort of a big plan that couldn't do anything simply. Had to make a big production out of things. And this was an opportunity for Tom to sort of show his stuff here, to create this thing that was going to bring the ship to its knees.
Mr. Twain, 6 o'clock. Come on.
I really like the lighting in some of these sets. The practical lights that you see in the shots are really pretty effective. You know, where you see actually a light that is a source of light in the frame. In general, we really tried to create a fair amount of mood, and you could do that with a three-dimensional sort of model set. You could create a lot of variation. So then we go back into the Diary of Adam and Eve after the fall of the garden, and when everything has been changed, completely changed over to being after, eliminating the garden. This is when the relationship, according to Twain's book, between Adam and Eve really starts to develop. Obviously, the garden was just sort of the preamble, and this is where it really sort of gets into the serious part of say a relationship.
It was against my principles, but I find that principles have no real force except when one is well fed.
Barry Bruce, as I say, sculpted the Adam and Eve and Twain, and did a really wonderful job. He's such a master. He was really the master animator of the project. Some of the work he has done on Twain and here on Adam, and his expressions and his feelings as he's thinking back about the garden and what it was. Really, really impressive, beautifully done. The part of the reason that the Diary of Adam and Eve is in there and is it really was intended to sort of help amplify the relationship that Twain himself had with his own wife and his daughter and so on. He had a very, very, at times difficult periods of his life where he lost people that were very close to him. And while there was a lot of comedy and a lot of humor and in things like the Battle of the Sexes sorts of stuff between he and his wife and so on, there was also, I think, a great deal of pain and a great deal of heart. And the whole idea, his whole visit, rendezvous with Halley's Comet was in some ways, I think, a kind of a going back home, going back to Eden, back to where those who had departed him would be, and that he would join them. So, I mean, that's kind of a part of what this is about. While his wife, Livy, was not on board, the relationship between Adam and Eve is really fairly represents, in many ways, the relationship between Mark Twain and his wife, Livy.
Nothing interests him.
This is a kind of a fun sequence. Again, good character animation on all of both characters, and good lines.
Would you like to see my etchings?
Really great to see some of these expressions and attitudes, and that, of course, leads to other things in our story.
A fish, perhaps. Sometimes she carries it in her arms half the night when it complains and wants to get to the water.
In Adam's diary, he remains perplexed about this small creature that Eve seems to have found and brought into the world, as it were. This goes on for the longest time in the diary. As I'm looking at these things, it's kind of funny to see some of these things in a sculpted medium like clay. But I think some of that comes from my own viewing of previous stop-motion films. It kind of took me out of the film personally to see other materials, to see burlap or to see cardboard, the edge of the cardboard, or to see other sorts of glass or other materials being introduced at various times within the frame. And I reasoned, I guess, that if you make it everything clay, then maybe it'll be pure and everybody will forget about it. The fact that there is clay everywhere throughout.
It is probably some kind of bear. This resemblance to words is extraordinary and is a thing which no other bear can do.
I love that Adam's, the baby's little cart has perfect little wheels, and Adam's has square ones. He hasn't sort of developed, I guess, the round wheel quite yet, even though the kids got it together. A lot of little fun things put into this. The fact that he's going off to search for another one and Eve's pregnant.
And because he is mine.
It has been a weary hunt. Yet I have
Sea lion caves stapled across his bottom. It's kind of a Northwest joke, probably. Sea lion caves being one of the attractions here on the Oregon coast. Actually, there's a lot of places in this film that, if you are very observant, you'll notice animators or set decorators have stuck in little fun things. Sometimes they're actually intended, and they were on the storyboard, and that, in some cases, like a bumper sticker of Sea Lion Caves. Other places, things will just kind of appear in subtle, sort of, but fun ways. And I never really as a director, I never minded that if it would add to it, if it could be something else that the audience could sort of discover. If it in some way gets in the way, it wouldn't work, and we couldn't use that. But otherwise, it'd be fine. I liked it. Yeah, at this point, you can really see much clearer the resemblance between Adam and Mark Twain himself. Partially, of course, it's the mustache that makes so much huge amount of difference. And if you're very observant, you'll notice that Eve looks very much like the character of Livy, who we see occasionally in pictures and so on the ship, and later on the ship as well when he refers to her. So Adam became a kind of a bit of a softie in the end. A bit of a sentimentalist. Susan Shadburn did a great job of adapting this material. Also with my help, obviously, and with our executive producer, Hugh Tyrrell. But the source of the material is just so great, the Mark Twain's own writing.
The garden is lost, but I have found him and am content.
Wherever she was, there was Eden.
So the idea here is that Eve is now gone and passed away, and Adam has been left.
I'm tired and old. I wish I were with my little...
This clay painting is supposed to look very much like Adam and Eve, as well as Mark Twain and his wife.
That's really why you want to meet the comet, isn't it?
And I am looking forward to that.
It's at this point in the story where the conflict becomes pretty intense, where the kids want to try to figure out what's going on and realize what they've done to mess things up.
Fiddlesticks, you're not going to die.
But how are we going to get home?
As soon as I get to that comet...
You know, animation is usually, you think of it as a medium for doing really lively action, but some of these moments between the kids and Twain, which are really quite dramatic moments, are actually really pretty cool. I mean, I like them. Not that I don't like action maybe better, but there's some really nice moments, and of course the lighting helps and the music helps, and the whole entire mood is created. And created kind of a slow pace in here.
I remember shooting this sequence with the flashing lights and the horn sounding, warning lights and so on going on. We thought, great, we only have to animate half as many frames because it'll be black half of the frames, half of the time. Actually, it turned out that it doesn't work like that. You have to kind of keep them moving, even in the darkness, or else when the light comes back on, they don't look like they've been moving. So it doesn't work. It's funny how you think there's little things that you're just going to save you a little bit of time here and there, and of course it doesn't at all in the end.
About 14 feet. 14 and a half feet.
Okay, Homer, 14 and a half big ones as the crow flies. Inside the fence, hold the back flip so you can see the driver, then slide one big one due east.
What the?
It's the pressure.
Oh, no.
Well, here goes. All right, Homer.
Like we tried to incorporate elements from the film, that they learned from the film, in this case from the story of the Calaveras County frog, into, how did they save themselves using Homer here. So, I mean, there are a few things like that. I hope they work, that, set up places where the kids have learned something, along the way from the stories of Twain, and are able to incorporate some of this knowledge and so forth, back into solving the problem that they're faced with here ultimately to get Mark Twain to the comet. This is kind of a cool shot with the camera with the ship sort of floating. This is a really large-scaled ship next to that Sphinx. A lot of fast action stuff going on here.
There it goes.
Damn, we missed it.
Let's catch it.
Aye, aye. Ah, to starboard.
Okay, here we go.
We need altitude. Jettison the superfluous. Cross the typesetter. Worst damn investment I ever made. Shove the formal wear. I've all I need. Hold on there. Keep that manuscript. Won't be published for years yet. We are fast rising from affluence to poverty.
So the comet really created a special challenge to try to figure out how we were going to represent it, whether we were going to represent it more physically, or whether we'd represent it more gaseously, I guess. And it was sort of it was challenging because we don't really know, in fact, what comets are made of. We just kind of have these images of them with a tail, with a head and a tail and so on. And of course, we wanted this to be quite magical as well. So the chase of it, and at times perilous as well. So we played it that it not only was gaseous, but it was made of sort of stone or rock or something that was flying, sort of meteors flying at them that they had to avoid and knock away and so forth.
Don't be afraid. Providence protects children.
So what we have is a combination of physical materials flying past, usually on some kind of an overhead rig, and clay painting elements as well. Here, this is in this sequence is sort of the opportunity for the kids to really show their stuff, that they've learned how to use the airship, that they've learned how to be contributors, major parts of the crew here to help Twain, now that they know what the real mission is, that they're going to get this airship. At least that's what Twain told them when they finally get to Halley's Comet. The sequence where it gets really dark in the comet, chasing the comet, is directly lifted out of a sequence from some of Mark Twain's riverboat writings, where, and in fact, of course, his name, Mark Twain, comes from Mark II, meaning two fathoms, basically, of depth. So this sequence is sort of created with the idea that these little range finders, were sort of trying to find the channel, the canal that allowed them to go through into the center of Halley's Comet. So, pretty fanciful stuff, but was fun, and it worked for the purpose of giving, I hope anyway, to giving a kind of a dramatic moment to where his name comes from, Mark Twain. This whole sequence is, again, using that front screen projection technique, but it's pretty amazing, actually, that we were able to pull it off, because we're all these composites, all these layers of atmosphere in the foreground, clay painting atmosphere, and the background, clouds, and so on. All this stuff is done in the camera, as opposed to optically printing or separately sort of combining the elements in post-production. So actually we're pulling a lot of stuff together there in the camera. The interior of the comet was really kind of a three-dimensional clay painting. In other words, it really had depth and shape, and was animated, as if it were sort of constantly moving folds of gaseous sort of material, and it created an atmospheric quality by having multiple layers of it, so that you'd see superimpositions of some of various versions or various passes of the comet's interior. Here we finally get to see the two Twains, the light Twain and the dark Twain, explain themselves somewhat. And I like that the kids decide that they're gonna tie up the dark Twain so he can't go with him. That's sort of a nice moment. But Twain, the light Twain, says, "No, he's part of me. He's part of who I am. He must come with me." Ultimately, we have to become one. Turns out Twain's cynical side is actually a pretty comedic side as well. It's certainly a source of a lot of his humor. There's no question about it.
So a scene like this where you have 5 characters all in the same frame, actually it gets kind of wild to animate, to resculpt in each frame of those characters. The singles are relatively easy in the sense that you're concentrating on one character and in the sense that you have lots of room to sort of work. We have multiple characters all kind of together, and you're working on one, and you're working with tools or with your finger, your hand, or whatever, and the other characters are in the way of being able to get in there and sculpt. So they can be really, those sort of tight group shots with stop motion or with claymation can actually be fairly difficult shots to execute. This was pulled off here really well. Nonetheless, Barry Bruce shots as usual, the Twain characters in this sequence, and they look really good. It was a little hard to imagine how we were going to bring the two Twains together. It was okay. I'm happy with the way it kind of evolved to be where they merge somewhat very magically and then appear in the basically as the interior, as a part of the interior of the comet itself. But those are always challenging things to do to do literal like that when you're talking about something that's so kind of spiritual or emotional or fantastic.
You can have it.
Yeah, well, I found these.
And with a little sentiment there between Huck and Becky, we definitely wanted to sort of put a cap on it with humor, thanks to Huck.
Laughter against the assault of laughter. Nothing can stand.
To me, the whole thing about laughter, the human race, and has what we really have is our most valuable commodity is laughter, is really kind of, to me, the kind of the theme and the importance of the story. That despite all of the sort of trials, tribulations, the difficulty, the darkness that sort of surrounds mankind, and I think Twain believed this, that our saving grace was really our sense of humor, and so important to get it in there, get it in wherever we could.
Well, so that's the story. That's the story of the Adventures of Mark Twain. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that that people that get to see this film anew in HD and all really enjoy it and get to pass it on to your people that you think might enjoy it as well. It's really a pretty special film, certainly to us, all of us who worked on it and created it. But it's also a completely unique film. As I said, it's the first claymation feature, probably the last claymation feature. Nobody will ever try something like this perhaps again. I don't know, not quite so anal retentively. So it's fairly unique in that regard. But it also, I think, is a kind of a serious milestone in the development of dimensional animation, which, of course, has been taken over by computer animation, and rightfully so, because that's such a powerful tool. But at the time this was produced and made, it represented a serious breakthrough away from two-dimensional animation into 3D animation. And so we who I think worked on it are very proud of its sort of position, I guess, in the animation history. And I'm hoping that it'll have a chance to be seen by more people in the future, since in its initial run it actually struggled because of being released as a kids film only. So hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy it further and pass it along to others. Thank you. This is Will Vinton. Bye-bye.